might sound strange to some, but I've always dreamed of being a bartender on a luxury cruise ship. Something about the endless ocean, the mix of cultures, and the chance to meet fascinating people appealed to me like nothing else. To me, it wasn't just a job, it was an adventure. The idea of serving drinks while hearing stories from travelers around the world was irresistible. And after years of working at a trendy bar in Miami, I finally landed the opportunity of a lifetime with Royal Caribbean. At 25, full of optimism and with several years of bartending experience under my belt, I boarded my first ship, ready to embrace this new chapter. Life aboard the ship was everything I imagined and more. The vessel itself was a floating palace, glittering chandeliers in the grand atrium, infinity pools overlooking the sea, and opulent lounges where live jazz filled the air every evening. My station was at the Martini Bar, a hotspot for night owls seeking exotic cocktails and lively conversation. My shifts were long, but the energy of the guests kept me going. Each cruise brought a new crowd, and with them came stories of love, heartbreak, adventure, and mystery. By my third tour, I had settled into the rhythm of ship life. This particular cruise was a transatlantic journey, sailing from Miami to Portugal and Spain over 12 days. It was my most ambitious itinerary yet, and though the days at sea were long, the promise of new destinations kept my spirits high. Plus, I'd get a short break to visit my hometown of Leon afterward. It was during this cruise that I met him, Sebastian. Sebastian was unlike any guest I'd encountered before. Tall, with a brooding demeanor and piercing green eyes, he exuded a quiet charm that made him stand out. Night after night, he'd claim a seat at the bar, sipping his drink slowly and watching the world with a detached air. We started talking, as bartenders and patrons often do. At first, it was small talk. The weather, the ship's amenities, his travels. But as the nights went on, our conversations grew deeper. He had an aura of mystery that intrigued me, and before I knew it, I found myself looking forward to our late-night chats. By the third evening, I could sense that there was something weighing on him. His eyes, though striking, carried a sadness that seemed etched into his very soul. When I finally asked what was on his mind, he hesitated, as if debating whether to confide in me. Then, with a sigh, he began to share his story. Sebastian's marriage, he revealed, was in shambles. His wife, Sasha, had been unfaithful, carrying on an affair with his best friend from college, Charles. The betrayal had shattered him. He spoke in halting sentences, as though each word cost him great effort. His vulnerability was both heartbreaking and compelling. I listened intently, refilling his glass whenever it ran low, offering what little solace I could. Despite the pain he carried, Sebastian had a disarming wit that made our conversations feel effortless, as though we'd known each other for years. On the eve of our arrival in Ponta Delgada, Sebastian expressed his gratitude for my company. "You've made this trip bearable," he said, his voice tinged with genuine emotion. Then, to my surprise, he offered to buy me a drink. Normally, I would have declined. It was against protocol, and I prided myself on maintaining professionalism. But there was something different about Sebastian. Perhaps it was his sincerity, or perhaps it was my own empathy for his pain. But I agreed. He insisted on making the drink himself, claiming it was only fair since I had been serving him all week. Reluctantly, I allowed him behind the bar, watching as he mixed the cocktail with practiced ease. When he handed me the glass, his smile was tinged with sadness, as if he knew something I didn't. The drink was delicious, a perfect balance of flavors. But within minutes, I felt an overwhelming drowsiness. My vision blurred and my limbs grew heavy. I tried to steady myself against the bar, but the world tilted and went dark. When I woke, I was in my cabin. At first, I thought I had simply passed out from exhaustion, but the state of the room told a different story. It was a mess, drawers pulled open, belongings scattered, the safe pried apart. Panic set in as I realized I was tied to my own bed, a towel stuffed into my mouth. Struggling against the bonds, I felt a wave of relief when I noticed that my clothes were intact. Whatever Sebastian had done, it hadn't been that. Eventually, housekeeping staff found me and untied me. By then it was clear that Sebastian, if that was even his real name, had robbed me blind. My jewelry, phone, and cash were gone, as was my suitcase. Security reviewed the surveillance footage and discovered that he had disembarked at Ponta Delgada, disappearing without a trace. They assured me they'd handle the matter discreetly, offering compensation and promising to track him down. But their assurances did little to calm my nerves. In the weeks that followed, I tried to move on, but the ordeal left a scar. Then the envelopes began arriving. The first was left at my apartment door, a plain, unmarked envelope containing a single photograph of me leaving the grocery store. At first, I thought it was a coincidence, a prank perhaps. But then came another, this time of me at the mall. Each photo was taken without my knowledge, each one a chilling reminder that I was being watched. The envelopes kept coming, each one more unnerving than the last. I reported them to the police, but their response was lukewarm at best. "We'll look into it," they said, but I knew they had little to go on. The fear became suffocating. I stopped going out, too afraid to leave my apartment. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow outside my window felt like a threat. The breaking point came one night when a loud knock echoed against my bedroom window. I froze, heart pounding, as I realized that someone had been outside. The police found no evidence of an intruder, but the incident pushed me over the edge. I moved to a new apartment, changed my phone number, and severed all ties to my old life. For a while, the terror subsided. It's been 3 months since the last envelope, and I've tried to rebuild my life. But the experience has left me shaken. I no longer dream of working on cruise ships. In fact, I'm not sure I want to bartend at all anymore. The dream that once brought me so much joy has turned into a nightmare I can't escape. And as I sit here, recounting this story, I can't help but wonder if he's still out there, watching, waiting. The thought alone is enough to keep me looking over my shoulder, even now. Summer in Athens was unforgettable, not just because of my niece Maria's beautiful wedding, but because of the unsettling figure that seemed to haunt me. I first saw him briefly at the reception, his head turned slightly toward me, wearing the same unremarkable clothes. I tried to dismiss the feeling, but the unease lingered long after I left Greece. Months later, my friends and I decided to take a celebratory vacation on a luxurious carnival cruise through the Bahamas. We had just turned 21 and were ready to leave behind the stress of college at Rowan University in South Jersey. My closest friends, Taor, Messina, and Taylor, and I had one goal: enjoy every moment. The cruise promised lavish amenities, picturesque views, and unforgettable memories. The first evening on the ship was electric. We explored the deck, admired the sprawling pools, and found ourselves at the ship's upscale bar. The ambiance was vibrant, filled with laughter and clinking glasses. Drinks flowed as we basked in the carefree atmosphere. Messina asked if I could grab her another drink, so I went to the bar, ordering 2 cocktails while she joined me. As we waited, I snapped a selfie with her. She was called back to the table by Taor and, in her drunken excitement, forgot her drink. Not wanting to leave it unattended, I placed my phone on the bar, grabbed the drinks, and returned to the table. It wasn't until later that evening, as we reboarded the ship, that I realized my phone was missing. Panic set in immediately. I retraced my steps but couldn't find it anywhere. Determined to locate it, I used my laptop to track the phone. Relief washed over me when I saw it was still on the ship, moving along with us. I reported it to the ship's lost and found, but no one had turned it in. Disheartened, I resolved to make the best of the situation and enjoy the vacation. The next day, curiosity got the better of me. I checked the phone's location again. To my shock, it appeared to be right near me. I scanned the bustling deck but couldn't pinpoint anyone suspicious. Sharing this with my friends, I noticed Taylor suppressing a laugh. Her reaction felt off, but I brushed it aside. Later, while we played arcade games in the ship's recreation area, the tracker showed the phone was still nearby. Suspicion mounted, and I confronted Taylor, accusing her of taking my phone. She denied it vehemently, her mocking smile only fueling my frustration. After a heated argument, I stormed off, spending the rest of the evening alone. 2 days passed in strained silence between Taylor and me. Then, on the third evening, I returned to my cabin to find an envelope slipped under the door. Inside was a handwritten note. "I've seen your photos, and you're beautiful. I found your phone and couldn't resist reaching out. I'm on the ship too, and I hope we can meet. Bart Vinsky." My stomach churned. Some stranger, this Bart, had my phone, access to my photos, and knew my cabin number. Panic gripped me as I reported the note to ship security. Their response was lukewarm. They promised to investigate but seemed dismissive of the gravity of the situation. For the rest of the trip, I stayed vigilant, ensuring I was never alone. The cruise ended and I returned home, eager to leave the unsettling experience behind. That night, as I lay in bed, a chilling thought struck me. I could track the phone again. I opened my laptop, and my heart froze when I saw the location: my house. My scream woke the entire household. My dad, a retired Marine, grabbed his rifle and rushed outside. Following him, I saw a shadowy figure vaulting over our side gate. My dad fired a warning shot into the air, shouting for the man to stop, but he disappeared into the darkness. We found a ladder propped against the wall beneath my bedroom window. The wooden lock on the window had been almost completely sawed through. Chills ran down my spine as I realized how close I'd come to danger. If I hadn't tracked the phone that night, I might not have woken up the next morning. The police were called, and they took the incident seriously, launching an investigation. Over the next few days, I became hypervigilant, constantly checking for signs of further intrusion. One evening, I received an email from an unknown address. The subject line read, "You can't hide forever." The email contained a single attachment, a photo of my cabin door on the ship. The timestamp indicated it had been taken during the cruise. Terrified, I forwarded the email to the police and was advised to stay with relatives while they investigated. My dad installed additional locks and security cameras around the house. Though weeks have passed without further incidents, I still feel the weight of someone out there having access to my personal life. My phone was deactivated, but the thought of what Bart might have done with my information haunts me. Every creak, every shadow in the night reminds me of that chilling note. I'll update if there are any new developments, but for now, I'm just trying to reclaim my sense of safety and my sleep. Oh. I work for a small tech company in the US, and my boss, David, is one of those chill, friendly types. So, when he invited me on a 5-day cruise with his family, I was all in. It was the perfect chance to escape the grind. David brought along his wife, Sarah, and their 16-year-old son, Noah. Noah was a good kid, a bit quiet, always glued to his phone. You know, typical teenager stuff. The first couple of days on the ship were amazing. The weather was perfect, the food was out of this world, and there was just so much to do. We hit the pools, checked out the shows, and explored the stops along the way. Noah mostly kept to himself, wandering around the deck or hanging out with kids his age. Everything seemed perfect. But then, on the third night, things got weird. I went to bed around midnight, dead tired from all the sun and activities. My cabin was just a few doors down from David's suite, and the gentle rocking of the ship knocked me out pretty fast. But at about 1:30 in the morning, I woke up to this loud banging on my door. Still half asleep, I stumbled out of bed and opened it, and there was David, pale as a ghost, panic written all over his face. Noah didn't come back to the room. "Did he crash here?" he asked, his voice shaky. "What? Why would he be here?" I rubbed the sleep out of my eyes, trying to make sense of what he was saying. David looked like he was barely holding it together. "We thought maybe he stayed with you or some of the other kids." That's when it hit me. Something was seriously wrong. I threw on some clothes and we went straight to the guest services desk. Sarah had already called them earlier, but now things were escalating. A missing teenager on a cruise ship? That's not something they take lightly. The staff quickly organized a search. Over the PA system, they announced Noah's name and asked him to check in. Crew members started scouring the ship, checking the pool, the restaurants, the game rooms, everywhere. But he was nowhere to be found. By now, a knot had formed in my stomach. David and Sarah were losing it, and honestly, I was freaking out too. This was supposed to be a relaxing getaway, but it was starting to feel more like a nightmare, and it was only going to get worse. The hours crawled by as we searched every inch of the ship. Around 3 a.m., the crew suggested checking the less obvious areas, the empty cabins, storage rooms, and other closed-off parts of the ship. We split into groups, and I was paired with one of the ship's security guards, Travis. Big guy, quiet, with this unsettling vibe about him. We started going through the empty rooms one by one. Most of them were pitch black, the air heavy with silence except for the low hum of the ship's engines. It felt like we were in some kind of horror movie. Just when I was about to give up, we opened a door and there he was. Noah was sitting on the floor, his hands tied behind his back with a rope, and his mouth gagged with a dirty cloth. His eyes were wide with terror. For a second, I just froze. It didn't feel real, like something out of a nightmare. We rushed to untie him, and as soon as the gag was off, he burst into tears. He was shaking so hard he could barely speak. "Don't tell anyone," he whispered, his voice trembling. He said he'd kill my family. Who? Who did this? I asked, my heart racing. Noah looked around nervously like he thought the guy might still be there. A man, dressed in black. He grabbed me when I was going back to the room, dragged me here and tied me up. The fear in his eyes was chilling. This wasn't a prank or a misunderstanding. Someone had deliberately taken him and threatened his life. And whoever it was, they were still on the ship. We called for backup, and the crew locked down the area. Security started reviewing the ship's surveillance footage, trying to piece together what had happened. Meanwhile, David and Sarah were beside themselves, torn between relief that Noah was okay and sheer terror over what he'd been through. But the nightmare was far from over. By the time morning came, the entire ship was buzzing with tension. Security had been reviewing hours of footage, and finally, they caught a break. One of the cameras showed a man in a dark jacket following Noah through the ship's hallways. The footage wasn't super clear, but you could make out his face. Kind of scruffy, maybe in his late 40s. The weird part? He wasn't on the passenger list. The ship's crew started whispering about ghost passengers like stowaways who sneak aboard ships and cause trouble. It sounded like a bad urban legend, but now, I wasn't so sure. Noah was still too shaken to talk much, but Sarah found a crumpled piece of paper in his pocket. It was a handwritten note. "This isn't your fault, it's his." What the hell was that supposed to mean? We showed the note to the security team, but they were just as clueless as we were. That's when I started thinking about David. He'd mentioned something a while back about firing a guy named Paul from our company for stealing funds. Paul had made a huge scene when he was let go, yelling, throwing stuff, swearing revenge. I'd never thought much about it at the time, but now, my gut told me there was a connection. The whole thing started feeling less like a random crime and more like someone trying to settle a score. And if that was true, we were in way more trouble than we realized. But here's where it got even weirder. Travis, the security guard who found Noah with me, started acting strange. He was cagey when we asked about the ship's security measures, brushing off questions and avoiding eye contact. It felt like he knew more than he was letting on. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were missing something big. Later that day, the security team tracked down the man from the footage. They found him hiding in a maintenance room near the engine deck. It was Paul. When they brought him in, he looked unhinged. His clothes were filthy, his hands shaking, and his eyes darted around like he was trapped. He didn't even try to deny it. "I had to do it," he muttered, almost to himself. "David ruined my life. He needed to pay." Turns out, Paul had snuck onto the ship weeks ago, blending in with the crew. His plan? Kidnap Noah to scare David and make him feel what it's like to lose everything. Twisted, right? But just when we thought it was over, Travis pulled a knife. "I'm not going down for this," he growled, grabbing Paul by the collar. Turns out Travis had been helping Paul the whole time, letting him stay hidden, covering his tracks, even giving him access to the security systems. Chaos erupted. Security guards lunged at Travis, and Paul tried to make a run for it. I froze for a second, but then instinct kicked in. I grabbed the nearest heavy object, a metal wrench, and swung it at Travis. He went down hard. The guards managed to restrain both of them, and by the time we docked at the next port, local authorities were waiting. Paul and Travis were hauled off in handcuffs, and the nightmare finally started to feel like it was over. But here's the thing. Even now, months later, I still think about that cruise. About how safe everything seemed. How peaceful, and then it wasn't. The ocean is vast and beautiful, sure, but it's also a place where things can go horribly wrong. And just when you think the danger is gone, it leaves you a little reminder. A week after I got home, I received an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single slip of paper with 2 words scrawled in shaky handwriting. Not over.